There is, in fact, an uplifting of our economy. We are getting to know that India has made a notable shift from the economic policies of 1991 when it exported gold and pledged it overseas to mitigate a looming financial crisis. The country has now shipped in a little over 100 tons of its gold reserves held in the United Kingdom. India now boasts significant foreign exchange reserves capable of covering approximately 11 months' worth of imports. Its gold reserves have also witnessed an upsurge. In the 1990s, India faced a critical situation where its foreign exchange reserves were depleted to the extent that they could only cover a few weeks' worth of imports. In August 1990, the then RBI governor proposed keeping 15% of our gold reserves abroad for emergency use. After receiving government approval, 20 tons of gold worth $234 million was shipped abroad. However, the measure proved inadequate to avert the crisis. But let's talk about the current situation and how India at this point of time has gold reserves worth $800 billion, 400 of them being in the Bank of England and other overseas areas. Joining me on the telecast, let's start our conversation. I have with me Ajit Dua, former Commerce Secretary, the senior economist. So what does this signify when you have 100 tons of gold that is brought back by the Reserve Bank of India?
Meghna, thank you for having me on the show. I must say you just got me. I landed in Singapore about half an hour ago and I've reached the nearest point of contact. Now we have in India, reportedly with the Reserve Bank, about 823 tons of gold. The valued, very well valued because the prices of gold have again been increasing. We have added about 27 tons during the last quarter when probably the Reserve Bank found that the prices, that it's well worth investing. And yesterday or the day before, we have moved 100 tons which were parked with the Bank of England. You see, roughly out of the 825 tons, half were in India, the other half was in the Bank of England, their vaults, and it's been a traditional practice. Many countries of the world have been leaving their gold with Bank of England. History goes back. It takes us back to the gold standards of 1935, etc., where whenever any currency deal was done by the federal bank, it was backed by a certain amount of gold, and the gold used to be parked in order to invoke confidence in the vaults of the Bank of England. Now there is no longer a gold standard, as you know, and India, with Indian economy doing well, we can easily afford to. That's why we've been parking at least half here, half there. And in India, we've been keeping this gold in the main office of the RBI in Mumbai, as well as certain amount in the regional office in Nagpur. What it means is actually two things. One, logistics arrangements, cheaper here, so India saves certain amount of money than the fee which it pays to the Bank of England for doing a warehousing or a storage work for it. Number two, it gives much greater confidence to the rest of the world because we are doing it openly, transparently, let everybody know, saying that the Indian currency which is issued and the other actions of the Reserve Bank, they are backed by fairly high amount of gold. And that's been shown 3 days ago in all the reports when the Reserve Bank decided to give a dividend of over 2 trillion rupees to the Indian government, largely because value of its assets went up, the income from it went up, and correspondingly the expenditure really came down, mainly because not because of staff costs or austerity measures, because the Reserve Bank of India decided to make a smaller provision for its contingency fund as it had been doing in the past. So this time they made a smaller contribution.
Okay.
So this is the background I wanted to say in the beginning about the 100 tons of gold being. It was already in Indian hands, but parked outside. Now we have decided to do it in India.
Okay. Aman Agarwal, the prima facie reason for the gold reserves to be brought back to India is that you are paying a cost for putting your reserves in Bank of England. What percentage do you have to let go of for taking space in the Bank of England to put in your gold reserves? And why wasn't this practice already instituted within the country by the RBI maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago?
I think, the first thing, in addition to what Mr. Dua has said, it needs to be understood is every one of us maintains lockers. We keep our jewelry, our assets safe with us, and then we keep some of them in certain banks or other places which are more safer in accordance to our understanding. Now, when we keep some of our assets which are to a place where it is more safer, we have to pay a fee to keep those assets, whether it is gold, jewelry, cash, anything we want to keep somewhere else, or documents. Similarly, Reserve Bank of India, many countries, not only Reserve Bank of India, but many countries tend to keep their reserves in the form of gold in a place which is considered to be a little more safer. This step not only indicates that we want to reduce the cost, that may be one, it's not so much of an importance to a cost. Still, roughly about 50% of our gold is still kept outside in different places, including United States and UK. We're only moving small component of it here back into the country. The key component is that firstly, we are feeling that we have the requisite safety structures to keep things safer within the country. Secondly, the important component is when we do trade, when we do business, when we take loans from international agencies, some of these reserves which are kept overseas with the banks and financial institutions come in handy as a pledge if you want to do it at any point of time, which, as Mr. Dua said, we do have sufficient reserves and foreign direct investment coming into the country. Those reserve requirements or requirements for keeping funds or deposits in a form of gold overseas to be used as a pledge is not so critical at this stage, given the solidarity. We are the fourth largest foreign exchange reserve holder in the world today. Now that should mean something, whereas we are amongst the top 3-4 in terms of the kind of GDP numbers we have. We certainly are not that great in reserves because we have a huge population also to service as a result of a reserve, but it is a very comfortable buffer we have. So the need for keeping these golds outside has got reduced, and that's why Reserve Bank of India is bringing it back to its home country where they have full control over it and they have the requisite infrastructure to give it the safety which it requires.
Okay. Interesting points that are raised by you. Aman Agarwal, senior economist, also on the telecast with me. And Aman, how is this going to impact our capacities to take loans from international organizations, the World Bank and the IMF?
Is that question to me?
That's for sorry, beg your pardon, Rubinder Sachdev on the telecast with me as well.
Hi, thanks. In terms of, if I get your question about, India's ability to raise funds, yeah, sure, but I'll still like to step back a little bit and join in with Mr. Dua and Aman regarding, this whole thing. I was thinking it would have been an interesting story, maybe narrative. We have our gold in the Bank of England, but we also have our gold stored in the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland. So like your show today is about that we sent in 91 gold to Switzerland. Now, had we brought it back from BIS instead of Bank of England, that would have, been an interesting twist in the tale. So anyway, those are the judgments of, our officials. And as both of our esteemed colleagues have said, it's a matter of hedging the portfolio and its various aspects. The other aspect which I'm particularly looking at, or I would always say, is that it's our gold is kept outside, fair enough. So are our foreign reserves, right? And if you look with with the fate of Russia, its central bank had around $600 billion odd of total reserves, of which about 300 billion were inside Russia, about 300 billion were outside Russia, right? Mostly in Brussels and a little in the US. And that money has been, frozen. So I think one other lesson in all this which is going on, right now what's going on, I think is much more a business-like approach, financial management, which our RBI is doing, right? But I think in a bigger perspective, those issues would also be in the background somewhere for us or anyone, like let's say China, Taiwan. Now, tomorrow, Taiwan tensions go up. Can China also, by the way, China's gold is mostly within China, right? I think they've not kept much outside, maybe. Mostly it's within China. But let's say their foreign reserves. Forget the treasury bills they hold, but the reserves in dollars, euros, and pounds, if they're kept in some banks in Europe or the US, would tomorrow or could tomorrow those be frozen again? So, that's the other question to my mind overall in terms of, how we manage our storage or repository of gold and foreign reserves. As far as gold is concerned, yes, I think it's a good, there's a good psychological basis also for this. There's a good rational and financial basis, but also psychological basis with respect to India's economy and our overall, sense of how we are managing our portfolio. So that's what I would think about the gold being brought back today. It's definitely a major logistics exercise, but I think, it's a business decision. I would look at it this way, with yes, a layer of optics to it, no doubt.
Achithu, there is this 1991 financial crisis that India had to bear, and this was under the P.V. Narasimha Rao government, and when Manmohan Singh was the finance minister, where our gold reserves were pledged in return for funds that could be raised and that allowed for India to have forex reserves that were at that point of time just 2 weeks long, to increase that number. Now, the forex reserves for the country today stand at how many weeks, how many months that we sustain ourselves with?
Meghna, things have changed for the better very appreciably in the last, 35 years, from 91 onwards. One, we have, as you yourself said while introducing the subject, our topic for discussion today, that our reserves at over 600 billion US are enough to finance 10 to 11 months of our import bill, as against 15 days of the import bill in 91. We've come a long way since then. The import bill increasing manifold our requirements of crude oil, for instance, and gas itself, being in a highly volatile market, affected by geopolitical actions, both in its production, selling, as well as transportation. We have done very well on that account to have created this kind of a backing. So the traders of the world, not just the government, they know that if the Indian government or an Indian company issues them a letter of credit, that it is backed by the ability to pay for it, not just in local currency, but they can pay for it in foreign exchange.
Yeah.
And that just brings about a lot of confidence in the economy itself. That is where I would just draw your attention to the S&P's rating, the outlook for India for the current year and the next year, where after a long hiatus, India has been moved to the positive outlook from different shades of, negative or semi-negative, but first time a rating company, which counts a lot, accounts for a lot, and the financial institutions value its assessment, have rated India, given it that the future is bright. It will be a host of factors that reforms will continue, fiscal deficit has come back, and it has a fair amount of foreign exchange to back its trade.
Okay.
So I would say
Okay.
all this is a very positive move in favor of India, and it holds well for us.
Anjan Roy is the former advisor, economic affairs, FICCI. Sir, a response from you about how the markets react when such positive stories are put out, information such as our gold reserves coming back. Is there a public sentiment that then augurs well for our markets to function? We already have our markets which have crossed 75,000. There is expectedly, after the elections get over, that the figures are only going to further fillip. How does an information such as this about our gold reserves coming back to the country, a large percentage of it, impact the markets?
See, the gold reserve coming back to country is not a very significant thing, because this is our gold reserve which was kept only outside. But bringing it back means a kind of satisfaction or revenge, because I don't know what happened, what people have spoken already. See, gold was pawned in the international market, capital market, to raise funds during the crisis, 1991 crisis. At that time, India's reputation, India's viability was so low that they insisted that our gold should be transferred to England for raising the required funds. And we had to transfer our gold, and the entire thing is narrated in Montek Singh Ahluwalia's The Backstage, his autobiography recently published. Now, from that situation, we are so well off now. We have got close to $600 billion foreign exchange. And we can now bring our gold, because this is not pawned, it's our gold. We are bringing it back into the country. And we are bringing only 100 tons. And there are some 400-500 tons still left in various depositories, mainly in London and USA. So this is good, but this is not very significant as such. But the state of the economy, the kind of buoyancy the economy has, this is what pushes up the market. And you can see directly the result is that funds are flowing. International investors are investing in India. This is what matters.
Okay. Rupinder, you spoke about how China has very little of its gold reserves parked in other countries, in other banks of the world. How many of the developed countries have then pledged their gold or kept their gold reserves in other international banks, whether it is Bank of England or we talk about the Bank of Switzerland or any other of these developed countries in Europe or in America?
I do not know much, but overall, I think the Bank of England, there are about 30 odd countries who are using its facilities for storing their own gold, including, several European countries like Germany. I think France mainly keeps its gold with itself, apparently. Germany does so, but there are 30 odd countries who are using Bank of England, and then, of course, a good number of certain countries using the Bank of International Settlements, BIS, in Switzerland, and then, of course, in New York. Now, regarding China, that's the overall idea. I'm not exactly sure, but I think, yes, that most of their gold they're keeping to themselves, but their foreign exchange, a good part of it is outside China. Right. And when I'm looking at we are discussing from that perspective, how much of your hard assets are inside the country or outside the country. I'm kind of, looking at both jointly gold and foreign reserves. So especially, I think, a reminder from the Russia-Ukraine war that half of Russia's, central bank reserves have been frozen. And in fact, now they're thinking of, the EU is planning to, if not use that money, but use the interest from that money to pay for weapons for Ukraine, etc. So that's quite something, half your money totally frozen due to, if not the whims and fancies, but whatever the policies of certain countries. So therefore, I do think a certain amount of hedging absolutely has to be done, should be done, must be being done, I think. But on the other hand, we don't face such, I think, we don't face such a prospect in the future that we'll be doing something that, but still it's something better to be, better to be cautious and keep an eye out.
Aman Agarwal, how judicious it is for a country to have all its gold reserves within its territory versus then pledging them or keeping them in other countries?
You see, it is not a judicious question. The question is how secure do you feel? No one wants to keep their money or assets at any other third party's place. I don't think any one of us, we may have lockers with banks, but any one of us would like to keep even a single rupee in a locker. We end up paying anywhere between 2,500 rupees to 6,000 rupees an annum, apart from the money loss, but we don't want to keep it. Something happens to us, that money gets stuck up for the rest of their life. So we don't want to keep our assets somewhere else, anywhere. But when it comes to safety and security, and we don't feel that security being at home, that we have the requisite security to keep that kind of an asset with us in our lockers or in our almirahs or in our homes, then we look at outside venues to go about doing it. And this is one of the key reasons most countries tend to do it. One of the critical reasons for many central banks to keep their gold reserves overseas has been, not for India particularly, but for other countries, I would say, some Southeast Asian countries, has been that there has been too frequent change of government. And it has been a problem that there may be a case where the government may come so corrupt that they may actually eat away the gold and the reserves which the country or the central bank has had if they take control of the central bank in many cases. And we have seen some of the neighboring countries and some of the African countries it has happened. In Southeast Asia, it has happened where the central banks have played a more critical and predominant role, where they've done this kind of an activity. As I said again, this is not the case with India. But certainly, we have had a case for security, which we are much more secure as a signal to the world at large. Secondly, as I said, we could always use it as a pledge whenever you did foreign trade. Fortunately, we have moved from a dollar or a euro-based regime to an Indian rupee-based regime now for quite some time. Specifically, after this Russia war started, then we started moving from a dollar-based pricing or a contract-based pricing on dollar to a rupee-based structure, which we used to do in long time back. Now, that is something which has moved a major chunk of the trade requirements of wanting to keep any assets or wanting to pledge any assets going forward, given the fact that everything is getting turned into a rupee, which we have full control of. So as a matter of fact, it is more of a question of your strength, your understanding of those assets, and how do you want to play with them. Would you feel more safer with keeping them overseas, or would you want to keep them back home?
Okay.
And as my colleague just said, Tati, there are many other countries which keep it. We have also reserves in the US Fed. So large number of countries keep it with the US Fed, also in New York. Fortunately, when I was there at the World Bank, I had a chance to visit the Fed in New York for a work. And then they took me to this reserve, which was kept, I don't know how many floors down. They took me and they showed me this place where
in
the gold
these
reserve
walls.
was
But
kept.
how many,
So
what
that is
percentage of the
very
gold
important.
reserves does America keep in other parts of the world?
I do not think that the Americans keep any gold reserves anywhere else, because they are one of the reservoirs for keeping gold reserves for the rest of the world. China in
Absolutely.
particular
is
has a
there in the
trade-off with
future
them.
any prospect for India becoming a hub for countries across the globe, then pledging their gold reserves or parking their gold reserves in our banks?
Firstly, the question is, you see, we are already a foreign exchange country where the rupee is already a tradable currency. So large number of countries have accepted the Indian rupee as a reserve currency. They're already keeping their reserves in Indian rupees also. However, we have still not projected ourselves. Maybe if Reserve Bank of India brings more gold back and has the requisite strength in terms of security provisions of keeping this gold, and the trade relations keep improving the way they have improved in the last 10 years, I feel we do have that requisite framework to go about having this structure, which many specific countries like the UK or the US have enjoyed in terms of keeping reserves, or even the BIS in Switzerland has enjoyed.
Okay, all right.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.